What does it mean to fear God? There's an excellent graphic called the Fear of God Continuum. It was devised by a man named Ed Welch, and the graphic was put in his book, When People Are Big and God is Small. I read this book in the late 90s. It's one of those books where they don't need to write another one on this subject because this one is good enough. It was one of those monumental books that God used in my life. And Ed had a graphic in that book, and I want to walk through that graphic in this visual. We live in a relationship with God, but that relationship is not static, it's fluid. It moves along a line. Now, the goal for our relationship with God is to worship Him. Now, it would be ideal if we could come to God and just be wholeheartedly worshiping Him all the time. But unfortunately, regrettably, when we come to God, we bring our baggage into our relationship with God, which is what Paul was saying in Ephesians 4:22, you have a former manner of life that is deceitful and corrupt, and you have brought it into your relationship with God. And so for many of us, it's an arduous and tedious journey to get to that place to where we can worship God in a healthy fear of God. When people have a sober awareness of who God is, when you really think about who God is, when you begin to fear God in the proper way, initially, our first thoughts are terror, because God is a terrible God, to use the language of the Old Testament, and we know that God is God and we are not, that He is omnipresent and He is omnipotent. And as Isaiah said in chapter 40, we are grasshoppers. It is He that sits on the sphere of the circle of the earth, and we are grasshoppers in His sight, Isaiah said. And so when we first began to have a sober awareness of who God is, we should be terrified. And that is part of what it means to fear God. But as we learn more about Him, our terror begins to abate. It can turn to dread. And as we learn more about God and move toward Him in a relationship, it goes from terror to dread to trembling. All of these words are descriptors of what it means to fear God. Eventually, we learn about a Savior, and at that point, we enter a turbulent time with God as we're transitioning from unregeneration to regeneration, and now our terror has turned to dread and then trembling. We begin to grow in astonishment and awe and reverence. And then our reverence changes to devotion. Devotion evolves into trust. And then we are in this beautiful place of contentment, worship, and that is the most healthy condition that you can experience as far as fearing God is concerned. But all of these elements are in play, and there are a reason these elements are in play, and I want to talk about that briefly. The reason that we're terrified with God, if you think about it like Adam, after Adam sinned, Adam hid from God. And when we first hear about God and what God can do and what the eternal judgment is for those who reject God, well, we do want to hide from God. And the reason we do that is because we know of God's holy justice. That's all we know about God. And if all you knew about God is His holy justice, then there would be a strong temptation to hide from Him. There would be a strong temptation to be terrified. In fact, there are many Christians who live that way today because they don't have a healthy understanding of the fear of God, maybe because of authoritarian and harsh and angry dads that they had as children. All they know is the justice of a father, the wrath of a father, and so they live in a cowering, hiding way, even when they come into a relationship with God, because the only father that they have ever experienced is a harsh dad. Some people live in legalistic environments where there is just judgment, where there is just condemnation for when you make a mistake, and it really distorts this idea of fearing God, and thus we never move down the continuum. We always live in some kind of terror or dread or trembling. But the reason that we hide from God is because of his holy justice. But as we begin to learn another aspect of God, as the continuum demonstrates, we seek to draw near and submit to him. And the reason we do that is because we not only know of God's holy justice, but we learn about his holy love. You could say this is Genesis 3:6 and Genesis 3:15. In Genesis 3:6, Adam sinned and he was terrified. In Genesis 3:15, we learn about the head crusher as Christ comes and crushes the head, that he is the Redeemer. God has provided a Redeemer. You don't ever throw away the justice of God, but what you do is you add the love of God. And when you live in this beautiful symbiotic relationship of God's holy justice and his holy love, you fall down and worship. You know that God is just, but you know that he has taken out his wrath. He has taken all of your sin. He did not do away with his justice, and he placed it on his only begotten Son, for God so loved the world. And when you understand these two aspects of God, his holy justice and his holy love, and when they become practical to you, you have a healthy fear of God. If you haven't read the book, When People Are Big and God is Small, I highly recommend it. You'll see some version of this graphic by Ed Welch in that book. I do want to take a brief coffee break and to thank many of you who support this ministry. You're the ones that make these webinars free. You're the ones that cause our resources to go around the world every day and reach hundreds of thousands of lives. And I want to thank you for supporting our ministry, $5 a month, $50 a year. Many of you support more than that, but you can do that. And if you are able, I would appeal to you, if you happen not to be supporting our ministry and you benefit from it and you believe in what we are doing, may I appeal to you, if you can, if you're able, to support us. It would allow us to do much more. I always have more ideas. There are always more needs than we are able to fulfill, and we only fulfill them when we have the ability to do it. And so if you're able to help us, I would encourage you to pray about that. And if you believe that's God's will, would you support us? Thank you so much for listening to my coffee break.